Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So what have I got here? Well, it's another thrift store find. It's a Marshall Lead 12. Yeah, I would refer to this one as a mess. It's got some issues obviously with the grill cloth, and I think this grill cloth has probably been replaced at least once in its life. I don't know what the deal is with this 2x4 that's been stuck in here. I'm gonna do a quick check of the functionality and then open up this thing and see what's going on in here. Well, that didn't work out. So this thing really doesn't work at all. I would have shown you this process of testing it. First of all, I plugged it in and it made almost no sound. The only way I could really get it to make much sound at all was to turn the volume and the gain all the way up to 10. If I did that, it just blasts out the camera and I really can't show you anything anyway. To top it all off, the Marshall logo fell off in the middle of my testing. So I'm just going to go ahead and start taking this thing apart. Alright, well this thing smells like a fart, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a vacuum before I go any further. Looks like the head's going to have to come out before this can come out. Well, my next step is going to be to desolder the speaker. You can sort of already kind of see what must have gone on here. Some Guitar Hero in the past had replaced the grill cloth with camouflage material. I don't really know why, but at some point they cut out a piece of the baffle board to try to accommodate the modifications or something. I don't know, maybe they broke it whenever they were trying to get things apart last time, but at any rate, I'm thankful that I do have the original speaker, and I can tell from the fact that this grill cloth was covered up in the past that the original cane grill cloth was colored black. Now I've got access to clean all the pots and everything inside here, but let's get this desoldered and get them separated. One more thing, I'm going to go ahead and take the speaker off the board because I think ultimately I'm going to have to recreate this board. Well, I think I may have celebrated too quickly because the cone actually may need some help here. It's been separated from the edge. I'm not exactly sure what I need to do to fix that. This may need to be reconed. I don't know what I'm going to do about that yet. So here's the baffle. Clearly somebody had some non-original material on here and it was removed quite haphazardly. I'm going to go ahead and start peeling some of these staples off and see what I'm working with. Well, the more I look at this, the more puzzled I get as to what's going on in the past. There's weird tape marks, like masking tape, cellophane tape. There's nails in it. I can't explain. I don't know if that's just because somebody tried to do a recovering job without a staple gun. Maybe that's it. Well, I just don't think this piece is original. It looks like somebody came in here and cut this out and then put this piece in to kind of hold everything together. But it looks glued in and not nailed or screwed. I don't know, but I'm gonna have to recreate this piece anyway, so I'm gonna do the whole thing out of a piece of 1/2-inch plywood and leave it at that. This plywood looks like birch, and it's well, let's see, 7-layer birch. I may have some of that laying around. Let me see what I've got in my stock. I'm going to salvage as much as I can off of this thing, which mainly includes right now just these T-nuts or these captured nuts. So I'm going to take those out, and then this piece will be junk. Well, I suspect that most of the problems that were going on inside here are due to dirty pots. And I'm going to clean those first and see what happens. But just don't forget, if you ever open one of these things up, make sure you discharge the electricity that's in those large capacitors. Those large capacitors are usually the filter capacitors, and they can store quite a bit of electricity. So if you short across them with a large resistor, that you can usually drain the voltage out of them, and you'll want to leave a voltmeter connected up to them until you see the voltage just disappear. Also, one more tip about working inside an amplifier: try to only use one hand at a time. That way, if you do get shocked, it's just going to be through one hand and not through your heart. Okay, with everything discharged out of here, I was able to clean the pots. I started out cleaning the pots with my normal little bottle of deoxit, and I don't have a spray bottle of deoxit, so I just try to basically jam the brush down into the holes that you normally spray contact cleaner in. And that usually works out for me. But I have to tell you, I was actually thinking that this amp was still broken after I did that, because I really couldn't get it to improve much at all. I let it sit overnight, and when I came back the next day, it was showing a little bit more signs of life, you know, making noise in a few more volume positions than it did before. So I went out and bought some of this CRC spray contact cleaner, this quick drying contact cleaner, and sprayed that inside the pots, and that actually worked immediately. And I also sprayed down the contacts on all the jacks, and just made sure that everything was just nice and wet down. And then of course that stuff dries quick, but I mean, just get it all super wet, and it cleaned everything up really nicely. I will say, after cleaning it up, I think that there's probably a little bit of noise coming out of these older filter caps, just kind of a little bit of hum, especially in those upper volume positions. So I think I'm going to go ahead and change out all the electrolytics in this amp. Also, I noticed that one capacitor had been missing. I don't know why, but somebody clipped it out. So I went ahead and replaced that. Found the schematic online, replaced that, and now everything's back to stock spec. I just think these electrolytics are old and need to be replaced. Also, I'm going to go ahead and replace the speaker in the amp. I could recone it, but it definitely has an issue here. And really the only fix for that is to apply some kind of a patch, or, you know, it looks like it may have been patched already, but if I don't patch it, then I'm going to be reconing it. And the recone kits for this speaker, if you can even find them, are going to be super expensive. I think what I'm going to do is just replace it with a nice Celestion greenback. Make sure I save this original speaker so that if somebody else wants to recone it in the future, they can, and just go with that. So while I wait for some of my electronics and some of my aesthetic parts to come in, I started to turn my attention to the cabinet, and I've done a full cleanup on all the sides. There's a little bit of a damage, like some scuffs here, but it's not super bad. I've gotten most of the grime and dirt off of everything just using a combination of degreaser, Windex, Clorox wipes, just various things. The other thing I did was I re-glued all the areas where the vinyl was peeling up on the insides, on the back corners and everything. So all I did there was just use some super glue gel and spread it on and push it back down. The glue that I use sets in 30 seconds, and a quick drying glue like that really helps out when you're working with some, you know, large areas that need to lay down flat and you don't have a real good ability to clamp. So you can kind of just press things down with your hand or press them down with a block and leave them for 30 seconds and then ease up. Once I started cleaning out all the dust and everything, I noticed how faded the black was on the inside of the cabinet. So I took some acrylic craft paint and just coated the insides of the cabinet, and it looks much better now. So this thing is almost ready to accept the new parts that I'm going to throw at it. I've ordered some new cab corners. The back cab corners on this one look pretty okay, but one of the front cab corners was cracked. I think it's this one. So anyway, I've got some replacements coming for this, and I might go ahead and replace some of the other ones. There's some like damage where somebody tried to pry at some of these other ones, so I've never done anything with these rivets before, so that'll be a shared experience for both of us. And the other thing that I've been doing is working on the baffle. So on this baffle, I ended up not recreating the whole thing because I didn't have enough plywood to do the whole thing. I also thought, well, you know, I might as well try to keep some amount of originality to it. So I basically just cut off that damaged portion. That allowed me to keep my stock hole locations for the logo, and I've glued on or attached a piece of 1/2-inch plywood to the top here. That's the original height. It's still the original width. I've also pinned in like this, like there's some dowel rods that go in between these two pieces to hold these together, and it's glued all along that seam, so it's quite strong. I've already painted this side of it. You can tell when it's painted, you really can't tell exactly what's going on here. It looks pretty good. It's going to work pretty well. On this side, I've got some spot putty drying up before I do the final paint job, but I'll go ahead and sand all that down flat and then give it its nice coat of black paint. Then I'll be ready for some new grill cloth, and we'll be ready for logo placement. Okay, well, I've been hard at work doing some replacements in here, and I really wish I could show you those, but my camera kind of died in the middle of doing the actual soldering. But I've replaced the electrolytics here. These are the filter capacitors on the power side of the equation here. And then there's some electrolytics here, here, and there's one different one tucked back up in here. These big ones are 2200 microfarad, but the smaller ones are all 25. And there's one 100 microfarad. I've replaced them with much better capacitors. You know, these are Nishikans. These are some mod capacitors from Antique Electronics. And then I've got an Illinois 100 microfarad capacitor in here. So these are all a little bit nicer than what came with this unit originally. And I've already plugged it up, hooked up the speaker, and everything sounds good. So I'm excited about that. But I'll have to show you in still pictures what some of these replacements look like. Here are the old Samwa capacitors that are Korean units. And here are the new ones, the Nishikans that are Japanese. And a picture of the backside with the ground strap on one of the lugs. The older Samwa capacitors that were 25 microfarad were replaced with the mod electronics capacitors of the same value. And there's one 100 microfarad capacitor of an unknown brand that was replaced with an Illinois capacitor. I will also mention there are a few tools of the trade that I use. Obviously, soldering iron. I do use a solder sucker to draw old solder off the back of the circuit board. I'll also use a standard X-Acto knife to kind of scrape some of the contacts clean. And I'll also occasionally use some desoldering braid, which is just braided copper. And I'll use a rosin pen to put some rosin flux on that braided copper. And you put this up against a used contact on the back of one of these circuit boards or breadboards or whatever, and you can draw extra solder up off of that board and kind of clean that contact up with this stuff. So it's really cool. I wish I could show you more of that, but unfortunately I had that camera situation. But I will show you the still pictures, and hopefully that explains it. Alright, well, cab corners. So I've done a couple of these already, and I've kind of got the process down a little bit, and I know what mistakes not to make because I actually put this one on in the wrong orientation and had to take it off, which was almost a nightmare, but got it off. Now I know how to take these things on and off in a pretty straightforward way. With these old cab corners, I don't really care about them so much, so the easiest way to get them off is to use a chisel and break the corners around the rivets and then pull the rivets out with a hammer. Let me show you. Alright, well, after all that chiseling, I've got an exposed cab corner here with just the rivets, and the rivets are sticking up about the thickness of the cab corner, the old cab corner. And so I just put down a piece of scrap wood, grab a hammer, and slowly work that rivet out. Now, this one's going to be a bear because it's decided to take some of the Tolex with it. So I'm going to have to slice this Tolex right where it's doing that. And then I'll have to glue that Tolex back down. Alright, well, that's got the removal done. Let me do a little bit of repair here on this one part that I had to cut, and I'll put that back together and we'll do an installation. Okay, cab corner installation is similar to removal. You have to put the pins through the corner and just hammer them back into place. Now I'm not going to hammer all of them in all the way. I'm just going to start them out, make sure that everything sort of lines up with the old holes for the rivets, and if they do, I'll send them home. Okay, everything looks fine. I'm just going to hammer these the rest of the way, and I'm using a brass hammer on these because I don't really want to damage the rivets. And the other two are the same way. I'll finish those off camera. Alright, well I just wanted to show off my new cab corners. I've got everything positioned and hammered in, and the back ones are a little bit different than the front ones, but they went in just as easily. This is a pretty thin wall of plywood here, and hammering those in was a little sketchy, but it's not that bad if you take your time. The bottom ones are the same, but you have to be worried of these feet here, and the easiest thing for me to do to deal with these feet was to take them off while I was installing the corners. And overall, the cabinet on these is plywood, and you do have to be careful. It will start cracking the plywood if you put too much pressure when you're hammering, but take your time and you can achieve the same result that I did. So here's what we're up to now, the baffle, and I've got some original Marshall cloth that I've purchased here, and I've got a new logo that I purchased, and I really only had to do that because the back side, there's only 2 posts left on this old logo, and I guess it was probably broken when it was removed and reinstalled a couple of times. But the new one is really sharp, really bright, little color difference, not major, but really bright. And I've got my pneumatic stapler, and I'm going to try to wrap this exactly the same way as the old one was. Now, this is obviously the repaired baffle. It's all set up with the holes that are needed for this logo to mount. I'll have to wrap this with the grill cloth, and then I'll have to poke some holes in the grill cloth itself for the logo to go through, but that'll come next. You want to wrap it with the face down, and just as a reminder, that's what the old grill cloth looked like. It just completely faded out to a weird brown. So anyway, interesting. I mean, it's exactly the same pattern. This grill cloth supposedly comes from Marshall, so I hope it does not fade like the other grill cloth did. Alright, so basically the way this works, Marshall wraps the top edge over about, I don't know, probably 1.5 inches or something like that. So I've set up basically that much wrap on the face of this. Now I'm going to staple it. Actually, I'm going to trim the top of this a little bit better than the edge that I was sent. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, I just needed to trim this up a little bit more square. Now I want to make sure that my pattern is the same, so let me just lay it and compare it. I think it needs to go the other way. Yeah, alright. Now my pattern is the same as the old, and I just need to wrap about 1.5 inches. I'm using 3/8 staples. I use arrow staples, but it doesn't really matter. I just don't know of another pneumatic stapler. Okay, now what I usually do here is once I get one staple in, I'll try to find a center line of some sort and go around to the back side and make sure that I'm centered up. But in this case, this grill cloth doesn't have a lot of defining lines in it. The lines that are defining are really horizontal. What I'll do is I'll try to find the best line I can on the sides and line those up and make sure that I don't need to shift it one way or another, and then pull it tight, and then I'll shoot a staple in the bottom center, and then I'll work out from there. Alright, now if you're wondering why I folded it on top and did not fold it on the bottom, that's the way that the original grill cloth looked to me. It had a fold over the top edge, and the sides and the bottom were just wrapped and cut flush with the wood. So I'm going to probably try to keep that, unless for some reason my staples or my cloth are not holding, and then I'll try to fix it, but I'm going to try to keep it as original as possible. Okay, so from here it's just a matter of folding the sides up, stapling those two. So just like I did with the top, I'm going to staple one side. I'm going to try to keep it lined up the way that I lined it up at the top, and secure it, and then I'll shoot the other side, and if it doesn't look like it's centered, I only have to remove one staple in that case. Okay, well that looks pretty good. I'm just going to keep on shooting staples. Okay, well the goal is to have a fairly springy and tight surface that doesn't cave in or warp over time, and you should be able to bounce, something off of it whenever you're done, just so that it's actually tight enough. And now all I have to do is trim up the excess, and for that I just use a razor blade. Alright, one last thing I've learned after doing this a few times is to try to take care of some of the fraying at the ends with just a lighter. Alright, well this looks good. Now I need to find the holes, and the way I'm going to do that is I've got a sharp awl or something like that, and punch it through the front side to kind of give me an idea of where the hole is. And then I'll come back with a superheated awl that I'll use to kind of clear the hole of any material that's in front of it. This stuff is plastic and it just melts fairly easily. Alright, well I burned through all my holes. I've got 5 holes on the outside edges and 6 holes in the field here. And I'm going to try to mount this Marshall logo where the holes in the field are. Okay. It's going to need a little bit of extra persuasion, so let me just help it out. Alright, well that's very nice, very tight. I'm real happy with it. Alright, well here's the back side. Everything's all buttoned up, and I can see all my white posts for my logo, so I know everything came through okay. Now I've got to mount the speaker, and like I said, the original speaker has a hole in it, which is unfortunate, but I have this little sweet beauty right here, which is a Celestian greenback, and I'm going to use it instead. And I've already pre-trimmed all the holes to get the gasket material away from them, and all I need to do is mount the screws that were in the original speaker. Alright, success. Well, let's mount a baffle, shall we? So this thing has to go in before the head. No surprise there. And as long as you get it positioned about where the old one was, it should mount fairly easily. Now it's got these little screws here that have a sort of a shouldered washer or recessed washer. I don't really know what you call it, but that's what needs to go into the baffle. Alright, well it's all mounted now. I venture to say it looks better than new, and that just kind of tells you that it's not quite original, but anyway, I like the way it looks. I like the shape that the cabinet's in now, and I've just got to get ready to mount the head. One thing I'm going to do, just to make this speaker change in the future a little bit easier, is put some terminals on the ends of these connectors, or actually on the wires that go on these connectors, and that way I can just unplug and plug in a different speaker at will. So I've slid the head back into place, and I've got it screwed in, and my last step was to paint the 2 back cover pieces and get those screwed in. I did not use original screws here. I changed to oval headed screws because I just like the look better than the flat headed screws. It's not a very big difference. I don't think anybody would care about that, but easy enough to change back if you want. And here is the money shot of the front of it. This is pretty tight. It's got a nice white logo now, and of course I cleaned up the face of the amp and gave it a nice cleaning and put the cab corners on. So I mean, everything looks really good and really new. There is a slight crack in one of the handle covers, but can't have everything. These handle covers are next to impossible to find, just so you know. This has been a cool restoration for me. I appreciate you guys following along. If you like my stuff, be sure to give me a like, shoot me a comment in the comments, or subscribe to my channel ideally. And I'll see you guys next time.